Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another Land App webinar on a Friday afternoon. My name's Dan. I'm one of the directors of Land App and delighted today to be leading a conversation all around farm diversification. Before we get started, just wanted to share a bit of an agenda. So I'm going to just spend about 5 minutes doing a bit of an intro and welcomes. We're then going to, for 5 minutes, just get to know a bit more about you. So we're going to run a Slido. Hopefully some of you are familiar with it, but I'll explain it at the time. It's just a way of us crowdsourcing some answers to see who's on the call and what you're trying to get out of the webinar. We've then got about 20 minutes to meet the experts. Delighted to be joined by George Badger from Ceres, Christopher Cary from Woolley and Wallis, and Emma Dennis from ProCam, all of whom will introduce themselves shortly, and each of which have got, I guess, some ideas to bring to the table. We will then be inviting them all to come and join me for a round table where we will be answering any questions that you've got, and I've also prepped some as well. So throughout this webinar, if there's any questions you've got, whether it's for Land App or for any of the panel, please feel free to use the Q&A function within Zoom. It should be at the bottom of your screen. And that will be covered both within the roundtable and within the Q&A section at the end. So just a bit of housekeeping before we start. Your camera and microphone will remain off for the duration of the webinar, but that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. Please do use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Feel free to stay around after 1 p.m. We are going to try and finish promptly at 1 because people are busy and I know there's lots of other things to be doing. But if you do want to have a conversation afterwards, I can stick around and perhaps some of the panel may do as well, depending on how curious they are about your questions. And the session is being recorded. So we will be uploading it to YouTube probably early next week. So please feel free to watch it back if there's any particular things that you want to re-listen to. And then the final point is there is a survey at the end. So once you leave the webinar, whether that's at 1 o'clock or if you need to leave a bit early, that's absolutely fine. But we do really ask if you could spend 30 seconds just to answer those very short questions because they help steer these future webinars and give us ideas on where we're going with both the product, but also more in that thought leadership space as well. I mentioned YouTube, just want to give it a bit of a shout out. If you go on to YouTube and type in Land App, there is a wealth of resources there, everything from demos and training all the way through to these thought leadership type webinars as well. So wanted to shout out, I think Will, one of my colleagues, hosted a mapping regen ag webinar a couple of weeks ago. It's really worth a watch. And also there was a good conversation around aligning stewardship schemes with existing funding mechanisms. So loads on there. Please do have a little look. And next week, this will be joining that lovely pile as well. Just a final thing to shout out is on Friday, the 12th of September, we are doing a webinar for site scoping with Land App. So we're seeing a growing number of people looking for sites, whether that's for renewables or whether that's for biodiversity net gain or whether that's for other sales, conveyances type applications. So that webinar is really going to be focused at using data layers in a more streamlined way to help you quickly identify opportunity areas, but also areas that strategically maybe don't make sense to put in too much effort. So really do book onto that. And I think Kathy or Rosie will be able to share the link by the end of the webinar on how to register for that within the chat. Okay, so I won't ask the speakers to come off mute yet, but I just wanted to flash on the screen who we've got joining us, so you can start thinking about the types of questions you can ask. So I'm going to be joined by George Badger, who's a partner at Ceres Rural, Emma Dennis, who's a integrated pest management agronomist at ProCam, and Chris Cary, who's an associate partner at Woolley and Wallis. So a real breadth of understanding within the farm diversification space, and they will introduce themselves a bit more formally in a moment. But before they do, we'd love to find out who's on the call. And so what I've set up is a Slido. For those that don't know, a Slido is an interactive way of us finding out who's on the webinar. And all you need to do is either with your mobile device is scan the QR code that you can currently see on the screen. Or I think one of my assistants, Rosie, I think is going to post in the chat a direct link that you can access the Slido from. So it's a way of us understanding who is currently listening, who's currently getting involved, and it also helps our speakers understand a bit more about who they're presenting to. So I can see a number of you already filling out the poll, which is great. Majority advisors on the call and some land agents, also some farmers in third place. So hopefully everyone's got access to that. Rosie, have you managed to? Oh, you put it. Oh, Kathy's done it. Perfect. It's in the chat as well if you're struggling to get access. So you need to click on the link, and then you need to copy and paste that Slido code to get access to the poll. Great. We've had 43 respondents, which is great. I don't know how many people are actually in the webinar. I'm going to quickly look. 106. So if we can get 60 or 70 answers, I'll move on. So we've got land agents, advisors, farmers. We've also got some government representatives as well, food processors, other, which is always mysterious. Put in the chat if you'd like what other represents, that'd be good to hear. But predominantly, it looks like we've got professionals who are working in the farming and rural sector, so land agents, advisors, but it's great to see we've got some actual farmers on the call as well. Great, we're at 53. Just give it another couple of moments just to make sure people have got access. There's 4 separate questions, I think, so if you don't manage to answer this one, you can always answer the next one. Okay. So yeah, predominantly land agents and advisors. So hopefully the next question should now pop up is, what are you hoping to gain from this webinar? So you can type in either a single word or a sentence or a phrase of just what are you trying to get out of this webinar? Why are you here? Ideas, inspiration is slap bang in the middle already. Advice, it's good to see. It's really about how do we share learnings. Everyone's on this journey together. It seems like ideas are the key areas. Fresh ideas. What's hot? Well, hopefully there we are, panelists. There's the challenge. What's hot at the moment? I know there's some fun ideas that are going to come through. Alternative mapping techniques. Interesting. Fresh thinking. Alternate income. Yeah, funding. Yeah, so we are not shying away today from, I guess, everyone's a farming business at the end of the day. I think a lot of the aspirations can feel quite philanthropic, but we're very keen to understand how do we actually make business sense for diversification? How do we bring in fresh ideas, share learnings? And yeah, hopefully today we will come away with some of those. Great, there's 6 of you still typing. We've had 37 people answer that, which is great. How to start, interesting. That's a good point. And I think a couple of them, just thinking about your land, thinking about your context, how do you start seeing what might be a problem is an opportunity is a nice thread. Okay, great. Well, there's plenty there. There's no one's left typing. So we've had a number of different things with ideas and inspiration being the kind of the key ones. Just very quickly, where are you based? I've asked where are you based in the UK, but we have got an international bucket if you're outside of the UK. But I'd be really keen to know where you're from. Okay, south and north of England are jostling it out at the moment. Okay, south of England is Midlands. We've got some people from Scotland. No one from Wales or the Isle of Man. Interesting. I was over on the Isle of Man about 8 weeks ago, and it was great. My first visit, and would highly recommend people go if they've not been before. Okay, so predominantly from the south of England, with North and Midlands also being represented. And I think that's one person from Scotland as well. Great, 52 of you have voted there, so that feels like a good number. Going to move to next one, and this is mainly for just those that have used LandApp. It's just what's your favorite function or tool within LandApp? So why do you log into LandApp if you do? Appreciate some of you may not, so please feel free to void your vote or say what you'd like to get out of mapping tools more generally. SFI, RPA, title registers, data layers, agroforestry tools managed to get a shout out, which is great. B&G scoping and records. Yep, good to see that on there. We only last week or 2 weeks ago released the biodiversity net gain register map, which hopefully has given you a way of viewing the register in a more, I guess, location driven way. Data layers, yeah, coming out quite strong. NVZs, RPA imports. Great. There's still 5 of you typing, so I'll let you submit those. Great. Data driven definitely is the outcome there. I think a lot of people are coming to us to access data on a whole manner of different things. So thank you for that. There is 2 more questions. One of them is just if you know what level of subscription do you have on LandApp? Are you within the free tier, standard tier, or on the professional tier? Reminder, free is for free. If you pay £15 a month, it's standard, or £30 a month, it's professional. And those different tiers give you different access. So yeah, I just want to gauge where we are in terms of users and therefore what tools perhaps we can speak about in detail. Great, a real mix, but professional is coming out just on top. Great. And then my final one, which is going to lead into the conversations, is what one word springs to mind when you think farm diversification? Just a single word that hopefully will be a bit of a theme for the conversations. Complexity, people, resilience, income. Yeah, great. Yeah, income's coming out on top. Campsite. Uh, yeah, I like the word necessity. I think that's a really interesting one where, potentially gone are the days where you have to be 100% food production. How do you think about your land as a larger asset beyond those field boundaries or within those field boundaries? Security, viability, great. These are all really good words and plenty of keywords that I'm sure the panel will be able to touch on. Okay, well, I'm going to leave Slido open, so I think you'll be able to vote during the conversation. But what I'm going to do now is come back to my slides and introduce our first speaker. I'd like to welcome George Badger, who's a partner at Ceres Rural. He's been a bit of a mastermind behind some of the Clarkson farm mapping, but is here to talk more generally about farm diversification. So, George, love to hear from you. Over to you.
Great, Dan, thank you very much. I'll just share my presentation. Hopefully that's going to come through. Can you tell me that that's working all
Yep,
right?
that's good. You just need to go into slide mode again.
Is it in now?
Not quite yet.
Um, should be on presentation.
Is it? I can still see the sides, but
Well, if you can see the sides,
maybe, yeah, it's all good. We can see
go,
it. I'll leave it to you.
we'll go with that. Um, so yeah, thanks, Dan. I just thought I'd start really before we go into too much detail of lots of different individual diversification options, is to really sort of how we approach diversifications and thinking about it. So I'm a farm business consultant based out of Oxford, but sort of wouldn't necessarily think it's kind of you, Dan, to call me a diversification expert, but it's more we visit a lot of farms and we see a lot of farms, so we can see what's working by their physical presence on a farm, and also see the challenges that people come up against. We recently did 1,500 farm resilience visits with DEFRA, so we got to see a lot of sort of first-hand diversifications. And I think a starting point of any diversification is identifying the need or the market around you. Where are you based? And to use a pun, is there any low-hanging fruit? And an example of some low-hanging fruit on one of my clients' farms was just a building like the one you can see here, wasn't particularly being well utilized. There happened to be a local startup business doing apple pressing and looking for that space. And it was very simple license agreement, permitted development to use that space. And so you've got to almost split diversifications into are you just going to be letting your space and allowing someone else to be entrepreneurial with your farm space, be that building, be that land, or are you going to be managing a trade yourself? Because they're two very different things. And often starting with the first and getting used to people coming onto the farm is probably a safer place to start. It's certainly much riskier. There's obviously tax implications of that. But that is where I would start with the low-hanging fruit, and buildings are probably the easiest one of those to start with. If you are looking to manage it as a trade, you need to be starting with a business plan, thinking about cash flow, loan requirements. But the key is really then your return on investment. How much am I going to have to spend up front versus how much am I going to get back? And you really want to be targeting 10% there, as if I've invested say £50,000, are we going to be making at least £5,000 a year from that? Grant funding, maybe some available. Rural England Prosperity Fund, Farming in Protected Landscapes, always worth checking out those first. But then probably the most important is marketing plan and connecting with your audience. Do not underestimate the value of a brand or just the paying a third party to do some website copywriting or a professional photographer to get some photographs done. Someone helping on sort of how you word a social media post. I've seen firsthand the difference that getting someone to help on proper marketing and sort of wording of things can make. And lastly, experience versus a product. You can often get wrapped around the axle thinking about, oh, I need to be selling my product for a premium item. Well, actually, a lot of people are after experiences now as much as products, or probably even more so. So pumpkin picking. People are wanting to come for the experience of picking a pumpkin rather than actually buying that pumpkin. And that can be rolled out to a whole load of things. So, can you be doing on-farm experiences and people paying for that experience rather than just taking away a bag of flour with them at the end of the day? So, moving on to investment versus returns. So here it's a bit of a complicated graph, but what I'm trying to show here is return on the left-hand axis versus the amount of investment you've had to put in at the beginning. And so we can see some quite simple ones down in this bottom left-hand side. And I've also done ongoing management requirement in green and traffic light system. So you might have a low ongoing management, low investment, but likely low returns, starting something simple like a camping pitch, or some easy wins, sort of letting land for horse livery or grazing. That is sort of at the opposite end of the spectrum. I would see a sort of high investment, something like a rural office space. There's a lot of cost to convert that, to get that up and running, get it up with the specification. And there's probably a ceiling as to the returns that you're going to be able to make from that. So you could compare that then to classic car storage. Again, low ongoing management, or of course you have people, but with a bit of investment to get that up to a certain storage specification, generally quite high returns for people paying to store their cars. With a lower investment, but still quite high returns, would be something like container storage. If we then look at the sort of more medium level management involvements, I've seen, and these, I should say, these are all things that I've seen successfully done on a farm. Horsebox coffee, so or it could be a horsebox alcoholic machine. So being able to convert something, take it to shows, or even if you have a busy public right of way coming across your farm, being able to sell directly to the public. A dog walking field, I know Chris is going to touch on that, but some good, quite high returns coming from those. And then a newcomer into this space, things like paddle tennis court. Again, investment reasonably high, but returns quite strong if you are in a space that there isn't a competing one already. And then there's some of the sort of high ongoing management. So of low investment, but there is still some return. You see sort of some quite interesting people wanting to pay for farm experiences. So can I come on a tractor driving session? You'd be surprised at people who want to sort of pay to go and experience being involved on a farm or a farming business. Or it might be a workshop. Come and learn how to do hedge laying, or come and learn how to do hedge planting or tree planting. Again, it's people getting out into the countryside and just paying for that experience, and that can be very low investment and reasonably lucrative. The step up from that is then sort of public events, and that really then merges into sort of cafes and farm shops and things. These sort of start increasing in the investment required, whether there's buildings required, you then into all of regulations and environmental health and kitchens and providing food, etc. But of the two, between a sort of cafe and something focused around children's and play areas, I've tended to see bringing in slightly higher returns and slightly less investment than something like a farm shop that does require a high labour input without necessarily significant margins being able to made just because of who you're competing with against products. So the farm shop often needs to be coupled or tacked on to something else. And last one we need to mention here is recent sort of rural spa seems quite popular of people wanting to escape and have these spa treatments, often not for sort of high investment infrastructure either. So something a bit more rustic in a rural location, seemingly quite popular. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of things that we've seen. And I think it's just useful to think about how much do I need to spend to get there and how much am I going to make back from it? Bearing in mind this sort of 10% rule, if you can make that even higher and get your money back in a year, in 2 years, in 3 years, in 4 years, or am I going to have to wait 10 years plus to get my money back? And then just to finish, moving on to utilizing the Land app. This a bit of a plug to help you here, Dan, but I use the Land app an awful lot, and this was just an example of plotting some new farm buildings. So again, new farm buildings often enable the reuse of the old farm buildings, but just things like drawing shapes and being able to color them in and rotate them. So here, access track in, concrete yard, some buildings. We'll plot on a lean-to. We'll plant a hedge here. We need to watch out for where those infield trees are. We'll put a soil bund where the brown area is. And then with the new mobile app, being able to view that map on your phone, particularly useful for a greenfield site, and see yourself as the blue dot. And then you can stick a peg in the ground to say, okay, the track needs to go about here, or the corner of the building should roughly be here. It's not going to be pinpoint accurate with your phone, but it's a useful starting place. Being able to draw radius buildings. So if you're planning a new livestock building, for example, and the restriction of 400 meters from a non-farm residential dwelling, you can see in this example here, we're able to draw a radius very simply, type it at 400 meters, and then you know your almost exclusion zone of where you can't put a livestock building unless you need full planning. And then just being able to see the data layers, so flood zones, ownership, gas mains. Is there going to be option for an AD plant gas to grid or electric lines? Should I be thinking about batteries, local habitats? Flood zone, very useful for plotting new farm buildings. Make sure you know that they should be just outside of the flood zone rather than in it, and small things like that. So yeah, it's a very useful tool. And in summary, look forward to taking some questions.
Perfect. George, thank you so much. Plenty of food for thought there, and we will come back to George during the Q&A. So any particular questions, I've seen some coming through, please use the Q&A. I'd like to welcome our second speaker, Chris Cary from Woolley and Wallis, who's going to give us a bit of an overview of some of those diversification techniques that George just covered. So George, feel free to turn your camera off and go on mute, and Chris, please come join us.
Hello.
Hello.
Speaking of two. So thank you for having us. Thank you for having me. And I'm sat here in Marlborough in Wiltshire. Just to give you a bit about me, I started life as a general practice rural surveyor, and sort of over the years I picked up more and more rural planning jobs, and almost by accident I found myself specialising in rural planning, which is a bit of a minefield. So Dan's bribed me the promise of a 3 years Land app membership to run through a few examples of case studies we've got on. So I'll just run through a couple now, and I'll share my screen. So I'm going to touch more on actual examples. So moving on from ideas, patients, and actually implementing them, one of the headline questions can really be planning permission for the
Yeah, Chris, just to let you know, your Wi-Fi is a bit rubbish. If you want to turn your camera off while you're talking, it might make the sound quality a bit better.
Okay. Is that any better?
Very sweet. Yeah, that's much better. So yeah,
So
we can
this is
see
case study.
Great.
You can see on the screen. So just running through a couple of examples. So build on what George has said, we have very much different ends of the spectrum. So return on investment and capital outlay at the outset is obviously a huge consideration for a lot of clients. I'm going to start on a fairly sort of grassroots type example. So in this example, we've got a 450-acre dairy farm. And if you remember back to, I think it was 2020, where Boris announced the COVID lockdown, overnight their business changed dramatically. You probably all remember videos of farmers tipping milk down the drain because of the outlets for milk changed, with restaurants and cafes being closed. Now this business saw it as a bit of an opportunity, and they made a milk vending machine. So if you look on the screen, where the blue squares, that was an existing agricultural building. And what they did was quite simply install a milk vending machine in the building, and then a number of other vending machines. So they were selling milk, bread, cheese, and the like. And that did very well during COVID. Now, this isn't the only person to have done this. I'm sure many of you would have seen milk vending machines pop up locally to you. What sets this one apart is what they did next. So, as you see on the screen, we labelled the dog paddock. The question used, Chris, to use that field next to the vending machine as a dog paddock. Unfortunately, being the bearer of bad news, yes, as it presented a material change of use. We moved on to working through the planning system, and did gain permission for it. So the nice thing about this one is we've done a few dog paddocks. The general business model is you turn up, you let your dog out, it runs around like a madman for an hour, back in the car, and you go home. Whereas what we have here, we have businesses that are really complementing each other. So on this occasion, you're turning up, you're grabbing your coffee, you're walking your dog, and then before you go home, you're grabbing your cheese, you're grabbing some steak, and then you're going home thereafter. We then further built upon that. So if you see the green square next to the blue, that was a further extension. So within that extension, we've also now included a dog groomers. So you're now going home with a well-tended dog, and we've got a florist in there, so supporting us local business, both of which are paying a rent and which are, again, diversification in the farming business, what we've got in that's been running for years. Now I'll go to another extreme. So previously we had a small business which was diversification in terms of the actual initial investment. I think it was somewhere between 15 and 20,000. You can do it cheaper, but on that occasion they put electric gates in, and made it quite fancy. Now moving to this extreme, this was a major farm diversification towards Salisbury. Now we have a pig farmer who was sick of the volatility of the market. It was pigs and arable, and it got to the point where pig farming just wasn't working for him. So we came to site and looked at ideas, and what we ended up moving forward with was a massive change of use to commercial. So if you look on the screen here, we've got a central farmyard, and we ended up changing 130,000 square feet of agricultural buildings to commercial, with a brand new access leading off a main A road right down to the farm. So, it goes without saying that the initial cost and the initial outlay with this example was significantly higher than the previous example, but with risk you get the reward. And one last example just to touch on, another client of ours, again, different ends of the spectrum, also, so Cotmarsh Farm, also in Wiltshire. They bought the farm, and with a strong mindset of agriculture and sustainability, they have really come on leaps and bounds with what they're doing. So as you'll see here, we've got quite a lot of the BBC have caught it, and other news anyway, lots of news people have been reporting on them. So we've looked at the existing buildings which are there, and we've used one building and we've converted that into a farm classroom, which is teaching all about the route from farm to fibre and the creation of sustainable fashion. As you can see, Kate modelling one of her hats. They are dyed with botanical dyes produced on farm, and they're also making a natural cow leather tannery from also sustainable methods. So, it's another option that has really buffered the farming business. Alongside that, we're also doing a glamping site. So that's just 3 examples to consider while you're thinking about diversification. But the planning system is really a hurdle and can take quite a long time to get to where you want to get to in the end. And Land App is quite a useful tool for working out whether the site is actually a viable site for the idea. I think we're going to touch on that later, Dan. So that's probably enough for me with some examples.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Really enjoyed that. And I think one thing that did come out from that, which I think George touched on, is like, how do you tell your story? And the fact that the news picked up something around your diversification acts as a whole new communication stream that you just can't control, but perhaps as part of the decision-making progress. How unique is this? How do we sell the story? Which I know, many people will benefit from, and hopefully that helps more people be aware of what you're trying to achieve. Thank you so much. So the final kind of quick presentation is more of a discussion. I'm going to welcome Emma Dennis from ProCam to come and join me for a bit of a chat around diversification. However, I think rather than talking about diversification in terms of, I guess, changing land use away from agriculture into these different enterprises, I'd love, Emma, for you to come and introduce yourself and just talk a bit more about land use diversification in the light of protecting existing revenue streams. So we've obviously had many conversations about protecting crops, for example, where you've got lots of flooding or lots of drought. How can you diversify your land to protect your revenue streams, particularly in light of climate change? So Emma, if you could come off mute and turn your camera on, would love to hear a bit more of your thoughts on that.
Okay, is anything happening there? I've turned on my video.
We can hear and see you perfectly. So do you want to introduce yourself firstly?
Hi everyone, and thank you for the invitation to join this discussion. So I hope everyone's enjoying using Land App as much as I do, but I certainly find it a useful tool when talking with customers and clients about how they might diversify and add more resilience to their farm businesses. Particularly as we're seeing more extremes in weather, it's putting extra pressure on our agricultural production systems, and it's making us focus more about crop resilience and drilling into more sort of ways of improving soil health and optimizing income streams which might arise from things like that. So we could be looking at soil, valuing our soil health with adding value with carbon credits. So that's a sort of a diversification stream that's sort of coming up the agenda at the moment. But it's how do we do that? So in terms of how I might advise farmers is what land use changes we could use to help improve the carbon content of our soils. We're looking at sort of water management as well. So we all know that water quality is rising on the agenda. It's a really important issue, and land managers have a lot of influence on ways we can do, improve water quality and protect it, air quality, and also biodiversity. So until we've kind of got baseline data about an area of land, that provides a platform to then measure change and inform different management decisions. Any comments on that, Dan?
Yeah, well, I think you're exactly right, which is, as a farmer or as a person advising a farmer, really understanding the context of the current business is critical. And that's both in terms of what existing assets do you have, what old buildings have you got, or what's currently working well in terms of cropping. And I think what I love about the approach that you and many of your peers take is really understanding, where is the yield doing well, for example, where is the the profitability coming from, and how do we really protect that? So, for example, before the call started, Emma, you were talking about drought at the moment. I'd love to hear a bit more about drought and the issues it's facing and Somerset's facing, and what impact that may have, but also tangible steps that could be considered when you're thinking about diversification of land use.
So, in terms of drought, I think we're looking at our annual cropping system, which we've relied on quite heavily for many years. We might be starting to look towards perennial crops, such as vineyards or agroforestry, and strategic planting of woodlands. So we are retaining our agricultural resource for crop production where it's feasible and viable. But, we can also use mapping to review yield and field performance or land performance over a few years, so we can see areas of the land that might be performing less and analyze that as to what the problem might be. But if it's basically marginal land that we're trying to crop, maybe it'd be better used for an alternative land use or habitat creation, which we might be able to be rewarded for with an agri-environment scheme, for example.
Yeah, I think there's so many different ways of, I guess, making the thing happen, but it's understanding what do you want to happen before you can implement it. So is it a pond that you want to create, or a reservoir, or and I think this is where the beauty of the advisory sector comes in, which is, if in doubt, there's lots of people out there that can help you. So if you're a farmer on this call and you know that drought is going to be an issue, and you're really struggling with working out what's next, there's lots of organizations that can help. And there's, I guess, commercial entities that can help. There's government grants. I don't know how far, George, the farming, the fund is stretched. Future Farm Resilience Fund, but I think that's maybe closed. But just get in touch, start speaking to people if you're out there and you're really wanting to understand diversification. There's people like Emma that can come visit and be a friendly face to help you understand what those next steps look like, and whether that is about land use diversification or crop diversification. There's so many different options, but I think the bottom line is that farming is changing, and we really need every farmer to understand that and work out how they can adapt. And that's both to climate change, to changing financial pressures, trade wars, whatever else is happening in the market. We need to make sure that we're ready for it. And I really think advice and people like Emma are there to help. Great. Emma, is there anything else you wanted to add before we start
not
the
really.
discussion?
It's just that, making, land that has a wealth of information, so you can bring multidisciplinary teams together to consider, thoughts and ideas, and you can model those ideas over a number of years as well. So, for example, if it's an SFI rotational action, we want to be able to have a discussion with somebody of how that might influence their rotation, not just in the first year of the scheme, but how it might work in the second and third year, bearing in mind the crop rotation and integrated pest management, and how it all comes together. So there's been some really fantastic discussion and some wonderful diversification ideas. I know people are looking for inspiration. I mean, here in the Southwest, we've got a lovely sheep trekking enterprise, which I thought was very novel. So you can halter a sheep and take it for a walk, which I thought was quite fun. And here around the Exmoor area, which is a designated dark sky reserve, some of the more rural businesses have got a great opportunity to exploit the night sky's darkness, and with stargazing as a really sustainable way of agri-tourism.
Amazing. I have been to one of the dark skies plots in Wales called the Elan Valley, and it was beautiful. That's such a nice idea. And yeah, I guess it's back to that really key point that we keep coming back to, is diversification really depends on your context. And I think there are opportunities out there for everyone. Chris has really clearly articulated, if you're on a public footpath, or you've got perhaps quote unquote issues with dog walkers, does that become an opportunity for you? Conversely, what Emma's just said around night sky, perhaps you're so far in the sticks that there's no light pollution. How can you start thinking about that as an opportunity as well? Emma, thank you so much. What I'd love to do is welcome Chris and George back on to the chat, and just between the four of us, would love to just have a bit of a conversation, and we can also start picking up some of the questions that have coming through on the Q&A. What I would say is there's plenty of you on the call, and we have got a great group of experts here, and although George was being a bit modest, so if you have got any questions for them, please do use the Q&A function. My first question just was for George, was just in your experience. I really loved the chart, by the way. I think it was very visual. But I guess more generally speaking, what are the biggest financial or logistical hurdles for farmers to face when they're embarking on maybe some of those higher value but higher impact diversification forays, so to speak?
Yes, good one. I mean, planning is probably a big one, and I know Chris can probably give a bit more detail on that. Whilst there are permitted development rights available, they can be fairly limited, and so you might need, full planning application. In terms of, yes, financial, but I think often financial is trumped by the time taken and that sort of management headspace. And I wouldn't underestimate, they can become a distraction, and you don't want it to detract from your core agricultural business. And so you do need to have enough time if you are doing something sort of in hand, in order to make it a success. Because often I'd probably say I would see sort of time and enthusiasm input almost directly proportional to success. And if something is sort of started half-heartedly, it's unlikely to happen. Whereas if you have someone who's completely passionate and committed, that's what will make it a success. And so it's about the people as much as the money.
That's actually a really good point. And actually, Chris, I think we spoke a bit about this yesterday or whenever we spoke, is I guess with diversification, money can be one driver, but there's other reasons that farm may want to diversify. So you spoke about a couple of things, whether it's enthusiasm. So I just wonder whether there's anything in particular that comes to mind other than financial drivers that a farm may want to diversify on.
Yeah, I suppose building George, if you don't like people, don't invite people onto your farm. So that's probably quite a good talking point. But I will also build on planning a little bit. So, ultimately all projects and all planning is to be determined against a development plan. So, first we've got to assess, is it deliverable from a planning context? Or actually, firstly, does it need planning? There are a number of projects where you can argue it's ancillary to the agricultural business you're already running. So it's still agricultural, for example, bottling your own milk, tanning your own leather, and inviting people to purchase that wouldn't require planning because that's ancillary. And then, like George said, you have permission development rights. You've got your Class R available, which is an incredibly useful tool. A lot of people think it's not available in the A or and B, but it is. So it is a very useful tool for change of use to commercial uses. And then, sorry, what was there? I suppose you wanted me to build on, Dan?
Well, just actually keep going down that thread because I think there's some more in there, which is, there's planning permission. Because we've actually got a question from the chat as well, which is around kind of the tax implications. So I know you did the dog walking thing. So could you just elaborate? You've got the planning, but what does that mean for agricultural tax relief? I'm not sure if you can comment on that, or George as well.
Yeah,
that's when I raise a flag and say, talk to your chartered accountant.
yeah.
Okay.
Definitely, get your own advice. But broadly speaking, something that's no longer agricultural wouldn't qualify for agricultural property relief, but there is business property relief. So if you are running something as a trading business rather than just letting someone else rent space or land from you, that's the key difference. Because if you are running a business still, it could qualify for business property relief. But of course, the Chancellor has now thrown all of this up in the air with the limits of 1 million for both agricultural and business property relief. So probably what we're starting to see now is actually people needing to carry out a diversification in order to generate cash, rather than perhaps, in a way, almost the shackles are off. If there's limits on tax anyway, and people sort of worrying about change of use for fear of longer term tax implications, well, actually that needs to be traded off now in terms of short term cash generation. And does that outweigh, because you're going to need a way to pay for the tax if there's going to be a tax bill anyway.
Just to elaborate on that, because I'm not sure if I'm quite clear. What you're saying is because of the change in agricultural relief tax means actually the value of agricultural land with a tax hat on mind is becoming less, like agricultural land when you're comparing it to other opportunities in the short to medium term.
No, I was more well, the point I was making is that people perhaps before were wanting to maintain everything agricultural, so you all got 100% relief. But if that 100% relief is now capped at a certain level, maybe the shackles are off, and that if there's going to be some tax to pay anyway, we should be doing things that generate income and the right business decisions rather than the tax tail wagging the dog. But of course, it's more complex than that because you may need to, at the moment we still have the 7-year gift, so you could still be gifting assets, although that can trigger a capital gains tax liability. And so you might pass them down a generation perhaps and then do your diversification. And that's often quite common advice from accountants because if you pass it down now, a bare agricultural asset would qualify for agricultural property relief. Whereas it's more complicated if you were to pass down a farm building, for instance, that was now let out for commercial, that wouldn't benefit from the relief. So you may have been better to have passed it down before the change of use.
Right. There we are. If anyone's really wanting to dive into the details of that, do reach out to an advisor because it's not something that we expect the average farmer to be able to navigate. But the honest thing is, and this is why a conversation is good, is it is complicated, but there are opportunities out there. So I think speaking to someone who knows is a really nice, I guess, action to take. What I wanted to kind of touch on, Emma, was kind of just taking a bit of a backward step in terms of that long-term vision. So George was, we're just talking about a lot of farmers are really keen to ensure that they have something to hand down to generations. I just wondered, with climate change in mind and that changing crop, I guess, demand, or I guess what grows best where, can you just talk about land use and the importance of thinking about diversifying land use to maintain that profitability and resilience into the generations of farming?
Well, I think it all looks at soil health really. So I think if you're looking at any continuity in healthy production, looking after that soil asset and keeping it in good heart will help keep the options for cropping open in the future. So that's never to be neglected if unless you want to turn it into a dog walking park, which the soil health probably is of less of an importance. So yeah, I think if there's opportunities to support changing farming practices, for example, with the SFI, there was a payment available to sort of connect with a reduced tillage system, for example. But that does have an upfront cost to the customer and it carries some risk. And that's where the SFI payment helped to kind of bridge that gap to help farmers transition into a more sustainable farming system, which in turn should keep the crop production potential of the land going, and so investing in the land now for to maintain future production potential, and also with this changing climate change influence, water holding capacity, water infiltration, and nutrient holding and cycling. These are all really important things to look at here in the here and now to protect that resource for the future.
And there's so many different ways to look at your land, but it's really understanding what are the risks. You've got farms that are facing wind erosion or flood risk, and how do we build land use to mitigate that, whether that's a shelter belt in the right place or a pond in the right place. And I think that intergenerational planning, is really important if you're a farmer now, particularly if you're wanting to protect production. Thinking about how nature can help you with all of that is really important. Just in terms of that, and I think this might be a question for Emma, but Chris and George, please do come in, does the land management and there's a question from Andrew, by the way, who's on the call, does land management for biodiversity and kind of removing it out of food production on any substantive level require land use change applications? Like if you're going down a biodiversity net gain route, for example, or a conversion of arable to a woodland, what types of, I guess, applications for land use change do you need to make? Is that one for you, Emma, or should we pass it around?
Please feel free to pass it around for other people to comment. But I think changing from, so for example, the question was raised with agroforestry. So would planting trees on your land at a set density, such as that through the SFI action, would it then deem that land to become woodland? So what is the land use? Is it permanent pasture or herbal ley, for example, or is it agricultural, arable land with a certain amount of trees within it? So when does an arable land use or land cover turn to a wooded land use cover. And it has been established that agroforestry planting density will not change the land use. It will still be arable land, and it would still be temporary grassland or permanent grassland with an element of tree structure across that land, but it's at the set densities. So yeah, it's an interesting question.
Does anyone here know what those set densities are? Like what's the canopy of trees that does turn it from I guess an arable or grassland into woodland? Because it's related to a question that Karen's just asked around a memorial wood. If you're still grazing it, can it stay as an agricultural field or does it turn to woodland? Does anyone know? I think there is a density online.
There was a definition under the old BPS rules. I think it might have been either 50 or 100 per hectare, but I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to look it up. But...
Cool. We can take that as an action, Kathy and Rosie, just to work out, because I know there is a threshold that they're obviously with SFI, with agroforestry, but also with a lot of the woodland creation that's happening. There is I guess, a defined amount of trees per hectare. I think they're working on to see land go from a agricultural use to a woodland. George, I've got a question for you. Is just a question from John Richardson. How easy is it to define exposure to business rates on any diversification idea?
Yeah, good one. Business rates, I wouldn't say is an area of my expertise, but yes, clearly if you are, so this would be for a building, changing a use for a building, agriculture benefits from exempt, but if it is being used for commercial use, for example, then it wouldn't be, and business rates would apply. They are, however, payable by the occupier of the building. So in the same way that council tax works on a house, it's not paid by the landlord, it's paid by the tenant. So often if you are agreeing someone to come and take your building and rent it and use it for a purpose for their own business, you would put a clause in there that they would be liable for the business rates. So they'd need to factor that in. But small business rates relief does exist. So depending on the rateable value of the holding. So if it's generally a small unit, they will probably fall under. But if it's a large unit, it would be applicable. So that does need factoring into a business plan as a cost.
Again, a bit beyond me, I think, but I think you're just so many different considerations when you're thinking about the diversification. One really interesting question here from an anonymous person that perhaps George, you can just respond to first, and I'll pass over to Chris. Is there's been a lot of discussions around what to do. Like they really enjoyed your graph, for example, George. But the question is, what signals are there of when to start diversification? What needs to be considered before it's almost too late to seize the opportunity?
I think income into farming businesses are going to be under a lot of pressure next 12 months. BPS payments, they've been capped at 7,200 this year. And so, there's income starting to drop coming in. So that's an early warning sign. How are we going to replace that income? But that could also be coupled with the need to draw income from the business. So is there another member of the family, another employee needing to be taken on, next generation coming in? What are their drawing requirements from the business? So you quite often see it with a sort of son or daughter coming back and parents saying, okay, well, there isn't that much money spare at the moment. So if you're coming back, you're going to need to bring an idea and a diversification with you and almost create the income that you will need to draw from the business. So that's often a key time for triggering it. But it could also be just something as simple as walking around your farm with a fresh pair of eyes or with someone who's never been there before and sort of saying, okay, well, yeah, actually that building there or this section of yard or that corner of a field, we're not really doing a lot with that. Is there something else we can do? So yeah, those are, I'd say, are the three sort of signals.
Chris, is there any signals you'd like to add to that?
I think George has captured quite a few important ones. What we often have a conversation with is a lot of agricultural business really struggling with staff, and that can sort of force change in a farming business. A number of our dairy farmers, can't get herdsmen. They're looking to come out or do other things, and looking at how we can use those other buildings, whether those buildings suit other uses, whether they're in the right location for other uses. There's no point looking at a commercial building if you're down a tiny track miles from a main road. But we often do is a review of the assets you're holding. Looking for underutilized assets, looking at cost to implement and return on investment, really, and seeing what assets they have, what capital they have available to them to invest into the holding.
I think what it definitely feels like is that there isn't any right or wrong time to do it, but there's no time like the present to at least understand where the opportunity may come from. And speaking to people, whether it's a friend or a neighbor, just to be like, hey, how can we potentially utilize this extra building or this field that's not quite delivering what we need?
There are families out there, farming families, who say, they are adamant we shouldn't need to diversify. We are a farming family. If the farm doesn't support, the business, that barn actually there, we can be growing more young stock in there and pushing the farming business. So diversification isn't for everyone, but income and the volatility of your business can be quite a good driver.
And that's completely true. People are wedded to farming. That's absolutely fine. But I guess the reality of the market is it's unpredictable at the moment. And I think what we're talking about here is just trying to stabilize that volatility, particularly when you're thinking about your bottom line as a business. Is how do we make sure that that hungry gap that we've got in our lack of BPS payment is potentially plugged by something else? We just had a comment, really, I think, from G-Gen Many, just says, thanks to all the presentations today. She'd just like to highlight the minerals and energy projects as another option. So no one's really spoke about energy or minerals, because at Holcim, they've successfully collaborated with farmers. So yeah, we've obviously spoken about a number of different things, but there's a huge range of opportunities out there, whether it is going down renewables or other types of energy.
Development rights. So development rights for temporary use of land, so you can look into that. So it really does depend on the situation, but happy to have a look and give you a steer. Plenty of people are doing it.
Chris, your microphone's gone a bit crackly for some reason. I'm not sure why that is. George, anything to add on planning permission for, I guess, transferring to certain land use types?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, generally, a change of use away from the existing use requires planning permission if the permitted development isn't already available. You do see lots of examples of people starting out softly on certain diversifications where it might be a relatively minor change of use and they don't apply for planning permission at their own risk. It's probably more common than you think, but of course I can't condone that. But there is people that sort of will then start off and then perhaps apply retrospectively. What you don't sometimes want to do is necessarily kill a project just because at the concept stage because you think the planning is too difficult. And so it's worth sort of probably visiting or speaking to someone who's doing something similar and see how they navigated that process would be my advice.
Great. So we've hit 1 o'clock. There are a couple more questions which I can stay around and answer for them. But what I want to say is thank you to everyone who's attended. And of course, thank you so much to the 3 speakers who've joined, Chris, George, and Emma. Really appreciate your time. What I would say is if you need to shoot now, please do. And that includes the speakers. Thank you so much for your time. But if you can stay around for 2 more questions, we can just keep it rolling for another 3 minutes just to try and wrap it up. But if you do need to shoot, no pressure. So just a quick question about, there's been a lot of diversification suggestions like pick your own experience, like pumpkins, etc. And they feel similar to things that have been tried in the past, but we've perhaps moved away from. So the question is, to what extent are we revisiting older models here and what lessons can be learned from why they disappeared in the first place? Which one's got any opinions there? George?
Yeah, happy to take that. I mean, pick your own and things. Yeah, definitely. There's nothing new there. What I would say is that, particularly on some of the experience-based activities, I think this is a new concept where people, increasingly digital lives, increasingly, their children glued to screens or phones and wanting to get out and recent farming's become it's a bit more increasingly in the media perhaps, be it Clarkson's Farm or other shows that people are watching it and taking an interest in that. And so I think people wanting to connect with where their food is coming from and get their children out and about in fresh air and open spaces, is that is a new concept probably from 20 years ago. So yeah, I think there's opportunity. Certainly, as a parent, I very easily part with money to buy a coffee on an experience of, if it's something of getting the children out of the house. So yeah, I would be a prime example of if it gets you half a day out of the house, that's worth a few quid.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There's never, well, doesn't feel like there's never been such an opportunity for the public that's more interested in farming. So it feels like a really good opportunity to seize that. And yeah, you mentioned Clarkson's Farm, that's done great for, I guess, raising awareness, but that comes with a really nice opportunity. And to you, the mundane might be the really exciting for the public. You mentioned tractor rides. I know some of you spend 16 hours a day sat inside a tractor, but there's going to be millions of people out there that have never been in a tractor. So I think exploring diversification through their eyes is something that I think is a really nice takeaway. So just final question then, and we'll wrap up, is just a question for the advisors. So I think over half the people on the call were advisors, is how can we encourage our clients who are a bit more stubborn to consider diversification and look at opportunities in order to remain resilient as a farming business? So I don't know whether, Emma, you want to come in first? Like, have you got any farmers that are perhaps need negotiating, and how do you overcome those conversations?
Well, I think it's about giving them confidence to change. And what Chris said earlier about some families, farming asset, they have been proud to farm and produce our food for so many years and don't really feel that they should be diversifying, although we understand now that it's a really important income stream where it works, and it's making sure that diversification, if possible, still protects the production potential of the farm. So like the things like the night sky observation, camping, sheep trekking, slip and slides, all these things sit alongside food production because they're a temporary land use. It's when we look into more permanent land uses of diversification that we see those that impact occur on our food production potential in the future. And I think there's also a bit of a risk with diversification saturation, fatigue. So everyone's got the expectation now, if you go to a farm shop, might be that you will have an Instagram opportunity with some sunflowers. It's become a bit mundane, so it's continually having to adapt and keep it inspiring and evolving. And I think one of the things I see that as a missing strength for many farm businesses is their marketing, and we've touched on this as a group. It's how can we help farmers market themselves better, market their products better, give them, make consumers aware how special some of these products are that we produce in our rural countryside here in the UK. So adding value.
Perfect. Has anyone else got a final point, or I think we can wrap it up there, unless you're anything to add on just empowering and persuading farmers to make the change?
Yeah, I would add, it is important, and probably the easiest way to do it is by almost hosting sort of open days or farm walks, or being able to take people to examples where they can just see firsthand what it involves. And typically some of those sort of lower hanging fruit, easier options that have a bit less management input. Certainly, if you were trying to encourage someone to do one of the more higher management input things, I think that is just unlikely to be a successful ultimate outcome, because they take so much time and energy that the impetus really needs to be coming from the farmer or the client themselves. Otherwise, they're the ones that know if they've got enough time and energy to do this. But certainly on some of those easier things, like, have you thought of putting a few shipping containers and letting them out, or have you thought of just smartening up this building and let's see who would rent it? Those are quite easy things to show firsthand.
Great.
I'd say a good starting point is just looking at adding value to what you're already producing, in some way, shape or form. Like I said, whether that's bottling your own milk and selling it at a premium, whether that's, tanning your own leathers, dyeing your own wool, and that could be sort of, put your toe in the water before going 2 feet in.
Great. Thank you so much. So really grateful, George, Emma, Chris, for your time. Thank you, everyone who's attended. My final plug is that if you want to book in a call with one of our account execs, Rosie, whose face is on the screen at the moment, is more than happy to have a conversation about how Land App can help you with any of these things. There's a couple of examples of, using the buffer on a radius of a building or looking at data layers. Do get in touch. We're here to help. There's so much opportunity for the rural sector right now. And if we can play any role in facilitating that, we'd love to. So thank you all for your time. We're at thelandapp.com if you need us. And as you leave, please do answer the very short survey. Thank you so much and take care.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.